Wii Fit, am I right? Now that's a video game. And to this day, people from every corner of the globe want to see more of it. And while I can't make you a new Wii Fit game, what I can show you is a side of this game that you have never seen before. Interested in seeing tons of balance board prototypes? This video's got that. Want to see it asking to be stepped on at E3? We've got that too. Or what about multiple, completely scrapped balance games that are still unused in the final game? Well, get on board, because it's time that we talk about the development of the original Wii Fit. But first, a word from our sponsor. Beta64 is brought to you by its Patreon members. And if you want to see more Beta64 for years to come, listen up. Viewers like you aren't just joining the Beta64 Patreon for those warm and fuzzy feelings supporting their favorite YouTuber. It's also because on Patreon, there is new exclusive content every single week. No matter what tier you join, you get it all. The behind the scenes videos, lost media deep dives, the new super beta cast, monthly Q&As, and so much more. There are days upon days worth of exclusive content. Want even more? Well, you can check out the Gold Edition and the Player's Choice tiers, because you'll get all of that, plus your name will be etched into every Beta64 episode while you remain a patron. Imagine it. This could be you. The bottom line is that if you like Beta64 and you want to see it continue, you can support the show at patreon.com/Beta64. And you get some pretty incredible perks to boot. Hundreds of viewers just like you are already joined on the Patreon. Check it out today. There has never been a better time to join them. The link is in the description, and I'll also put it on the end card too. Now, I say we head back and check out the development of Wii Fit. So to start this video, I need to mention that back in the Wii and DS era, there were a lot of games that came about specifically based on Miyamoto's current hobbies. Pikmin came about because of his gardening hobby, and Nintendogs was based on him raising his first pet dog. Wii Fit was no different, and its original idea was based entirely on Miyamoto's hobby of weighing himself. During his time at Nintendo, his long hours and constant snacking had caused him to put on weight. So his doctor recommended he started swimming to help his back issues. He lost weight, started feeling better, and began to really enjoy fitness. But for some reason, after a while, he started gaining weight again. So he started checking his weight on an old bathroom scale to see what was going on here. Then one day, his wife surprised him with a new scale that not only measured weight more accurately, but also showed body fat information as well. That's when Miyamoto's hobby of weighing himself truly began, with him checking his weight every day and graphing it out by hand to notice any trends. This went on for about a year before he realized that he was really enjoying this process. Well, if I'm enjoying it, surely other people would too, he thought. What if we made this into a video game? And that's how Wii Fit began. Kinda. See, at first, it wasn't for the Wii. Instead, it was planned for the DS. Miyamoto decided to recruit Hiroshi Matsunaga for this project, and he would eventually become the director of Wii Fit. But at the beginning, he was just told to work on a health program for the DS, and that was basically it. Miyamoto didn't really give him any details on what it should include. Matsunaga was understandably confused and decided to take it upon himself to figure out what kind of game that he should make. He decided to focus on the concept of dieting. So in this DS game, you could record the food you ate, the amount of calories in them, and most importantly for Miyamoto, you could input your weight on a graph. That way you could see a connection between what you ate and your weight. It really sounds like just a standard piece of health software, nothing too wild. But then, Miyamoto had an idea. What if instead of inputting your weight manually, we just made our own bathroom scale controller? Then it could all be done automatically. So Matsunaga was told to switch gears and make this game for the Wii instead. But he wouldn't be doing it alone. Miyamoto brought on Tadashi Sugiyama as the game's producer, previously known for his work as the visual director of Mario Kart 64. And he and Matsunaga would begin development on Wii Fit. Now, I should mention that it wasn't called Wii Fit at the time. It was actually developed under a different title at first, Health Pack. It was one of 3 games that Miyamoto wanted to see release alongside the launch of the Nintendo Wii. The first one was Sports Pack, which obviously is Wii Sports. And then there was Party Pack, which is actually Wii Play. And while these two did make it to the launch of the Nintendo Wii, unfortunately, Health Pack was not so lucky. So this Health Pack game started development sometime around 2003 or 2004. but the developers still didn't know what this game would actually be about. The only thing they had to go on was Miyamoto's request to make a game about weighing yourself. That's pretty much it. As you could guess, the team was very confused. I mean, it would be fine if Miyamoto was around to explain his ideas and brainstorm with the team, but he was so busy with helping develop the Wii that he didn't have any time for Health Pack. And that's not good, because this game was his idea, all about his hobby that no one else on the team understood. How are they going to make weighing yourself into a fun video game? They had no idea, but they had to try. To start, they began making prototypes, which consisted of nothing more than just weighing yourself. At first, they considered having a bathroom scale with a USB port. That way you could plug a flash drive in to transfer the data to Health Pack. But that was not what Miyamoto wanted. He didn't want everyone weighing themselves in the bathroom in total privacy. He wanted them to do it in the living room in front of everybody. After all, Nintendo had just finalized the Wii's concept as a system for the whole family. So to fit with that concept, the team had to turn a game about weighing yourself into something the family could enjoy together. And that's not going to be easy. All the team could really do was continue iterating on this idea of weighing yourself, even if it didn't feel very fun. And the worst part is, since Miyamoto was so busy at the time, the development process was just to make something up, bring it to Miyamoto, and most of the time he would just say, nah, that's not it, try something else. Not the most ideal. At this point, the only thing they had other than the weighing part was the ability to calculate the user's body fat percentage, and it didn't even make it into the final game. But that's not to say everything at this early stage got scrapped. They did have one thing at this point that really stuck till the very end. The realization that if people are going to be weighing themselves every day, it has to be quick. Having the user required to put in a game disc, wait for it to start spinning, then boot up the software just to weigh themselves, that was not going to work. Especially when the alternative is just going to a scale in the bathroom and it takes like 5 seconds. So they decided early in development that they needed to minimize the amount of time it would take to check your weight. And what better way than through a dedicated Wii channel, which made Wii Fit the first game to have its own channel. But no matter how good that idea was, they still had a glaring issue in their plans. They didn't have a scale controller. So before they could figure out how to make the game fun, they needed to figure out if they could even make something that could measure the player's weight at all.
So how does one make a bathroom scale controller? You'd think the first course of action would be to contact Nintendo's hardware division and get some help making a prototype, but they didn't want to do that. Instead, at the beginning, they decided they'd just figure it out themselves. But this was the Entertainment Analysis and Development Division. These are software people, right? Not hardware people. So how are they going to make that work? Well, they weren't all software people. Takao Sawano and Hitoshi Yamazaki were both in this software department, but had previous experience making hardware. They figured they could at least handle making some of the initial prototypes. After all, there was really no point in bothering the hardware division when they weren't sure that this game was even gonna work out in the end anyway.
Alright, if we are doing this, number one priority, we have to keep costs down. Since they would need to sell this game and the hardware together, if they didn't make it as cheap as possible, it was not going to sell. At first, they thought they would just use the same parts found in a typical bathroom scale. But when talking with Nintendo's game accessory partners, they quickly found out that the cost would be far too much if they did it that way. I wonder if there's anything we've already got lying around Nintendo HQ that might work for this. Ooh, you know what? What about the Nintendo 64 controller? Now, I'm well aware that it doesn't look like a bathroom scale, but this controller uses an optical rotary encoder in the control stick, which is a device that basically measures the number of rotations an object makes. We haven't attempted this before, but what if we use that to measure a person's weight? Like have it where when you stand on the scale, it rotates some cogs, and we can measure weight based on how many rotations that it makes. So they made a prototype, and believe it or not, it actually worked great. That's awesome, problem solved. Well, I guess that's just one problem solved. The game still isn't fun. None of this was really marketable, and Sawano was having doubts that Miyamoto's idea of selling a bathroom scale was really gonna work. And it wasn't just him, the development team was at a breaking point. Literally, they were on the verge of breaking up and canceling the project. I mean, even with this controller working, we don't have a single usable idea, and Miyamoto didn't have any help to provide them. Truly, it was over for HealthPack.
Now, of course, we know that this wasn't actually the end of Wii Fit. They did eventually figure it out, but how? What was the moment that finally set the team up for success? Well, it was thanks to two things: therapy and sumo wrestling.
One day, Sawano and Sugiyama, both separately, were thinking over what to do about HealthPack. All of a sudden, by complete coincidence, both of them came to the same conclusion. Weighing yourself with one scale is boring, but weighing yourself with two scales might not be. For Sawano, the idea came from sumo wrestlers who have to weigh themselves with two scales. And for Sugiyama, it came from doing research on Seitai therapy, which sometimes involves two scales in order to maintain good posture. So what's so fun about that? Okay, well, hear me out. Stand on both scales side by side and try to see if you can make them both the same number. Pretty fun, right? It's actually like a game. As small as this idea sounds, this was the turning point for the project. Quickly, a programmer connected two bathroom scales to a computer and was told to make the data show on screen in a way that was simple and easy to understand. And it sucked, because these scales were only measuring your weight around 4 to 5 times a second, which was way too slow for gaming. So the team spent about a week modifying the hardware to send out signals 60 times per second, one for every frame of the game. Now we're talking. The team tried it out and found it to be more than kinda fun. It was very fun. Everyone was taking turns trying to keep that perfect 50-50 balance. And not only did this idea become the basic balance test in the Wii Fit body test, but the developer challenge of keeping a perfect 50-50 was also added in as an Easter egg called the Ultimate Balance Test. But okay, if we're going to go down this path, we have to ask this question. Does training yourself to maintain a better balance actually help keep you fit in some way? So the team looked into it, and thank goodness there were actual exercises out there based solely on balance. Perfect. From this point forward, we're going to make the theme of HealthPack keeping players fit through balance.
After deciding to make Wii Fit all about balance, it was time to make some prototype balance boards. The development team immediately contacted Nintendo's game accessory partners to get some help redesigning their prototype board to include 2 optical rotary sensors instead of 1. That way they could move forward with the best idea they had come up with yet.
There were several prototypes made of the balance board throughout the course of development. The first we've got a photo of is this one, which looks more like a Taiko no Tatsujin drum than the final balance board. Inside, as I said before, are 2 optical rotary sensors, which are marked with these red squares. This is the same technology that existed in the Nintendo 64 control stick, making it very cost-effective to use, so long as they didn't use too many of them. Surely we only need 2, right? Right? Well, as the team was making this prototype, Sawano had another idea. What if we did 4 sensors instead of just 2? That way we'll be able to detect left, right, forward, and back movement. What do you think about that, team? They did not like that idea at all. They just thought it would add way too much to the cost, and they already had plenty of ideas that would just need the left and right movement. The potential cost increase was not worth the addition of forward and back detection. But Sawano was determined to see this idea through. So on his own time, with the help of Yamazaki, they both brainstormed ways to get that forward and back movement while keeping costs down. Their first big step was to scrap the sensors altogether and instead use the Wiimote's accelerometer to detect the balance. But how would they do that? By placing the Wiimote directly in the center of the board. But if they wanted to do it that way, the bottom of the board had to be slightly rounded so that way it could tilt. To do that, Yamazaki just added a saucepan lid to the bottom of their prototype. This was about the time that they realized, you know what, maybe, just maybe this isn't a very good idea. Yeah, the costs are lower, but the board is thicker, you have to have a Wiimote right between your feet that you can step on, and on top of all that, it actually didn't even work that well. The balance detection was subpar at best. So, with all that being said, the prototypes that Sawano and Yamazaki made were scrapped. But they couldn't just give up. They gotta find another way to make this work. It wasn't just because they wanted forward and back movement, but they were also concerned about the original prototype's use of cogs to measure balance. Those things are eventually going to wear down after years of use, and when that happens, the whole board is going to be completely worthless. Sawano was just not convinced that this was the way forward. He felt that they needed to simplify things, and that's where another epiphany came to be. What if we used a strain gauge? What the heck's a strain gauge? Well, to keep things simple, it basically works by measuring how much bend a piece of metal has. So in the case of the balance board, they could put a strain gauge into each of the legs, so that way when the player steps on it, the metal piece is going to bend under the pressure. They could measure that bend to grab the user's weight, and then if you use more than one, you can also detect their balance too. There were no moving parts, reducing the chance of malfunction, and by moving these parts out of the center of the board, things would be simpler to repair if something went wrong. It seemed like the perfect solution, but of course, there was going to be a trade-off. As you could probably guess, the trade-off was the cost. It would be way cheaper to use the sensors from the Nintendo 64 controller, and not to mention you only need 2 of those to make it work, but using a strain gauge required at least 3, since having the balance board with only 2 legs would be very unstable. When Sawano brought this idea to the rest of the team, who were all pretty much set on the original design using 2 sensors, they all agreed that the strain gauge was definitely the better design that would last the longest. Even if the cost of the 3 gauges would be greater, yeah, let's do it. Oh, wait, did I say 3 sensors? Oh, sorry, actually we're gonna need 4. Having 3 legs on the board, yeah, it's still too unstable for the player. Okay, well, hey, now we can actually detect left, right, forward, and back movement in addition to all those other perks. This is what we're gonna do. 4 legs, each with a strain gauge inside. It took roughly half a year to get to this point, but it was all worth it. Other than the cost, everything else just made sense. We've done all we can as software people. It's time we call upon the hardware people. The Integrated Research and Development Division.
The reality is the software division could only do so much before they had to send it off to the professionals. Besides, they couldn't keep getting wrapped up in all this hardware stuff. They needed to focus on making the brand new balance games. But don't worry, the balance board's in good hands. Takeshi Nagareta was the one put in charge of the hardware. After all, he had a good track record making controllers like the DK Bongos. But while the Bongos were also a pretty weird controller, even Nagareta thought that the balance board was really weird. But he and the rest of his team were up for the challenge.
So first things first, Sawano, could you show us the prototype that you made? Oh, it's a plank of wood with 4 legs, plugged into 2 Wii remotes. Okay, yeah, I can definitely see some room for improvement here. And this was their first attempt at improving it. Things are looking much more like an actual consumer product, but it does still look very different from the final version. First off, it's still tethered to the Wii Remote's extension port, but at least it's only 1 now instead of 2. Though it is completely square, and only around 32 centimeters or 1 foot in width. And there's not a lot of room to move around on this thing. For the next couple prototypes, they attempted to fix some of these issues by making the board slightly wider and adding a little spot to keep your Wii Remote off the floor. Granted, it is up for debate whether or not this is actually safer than just laying it on the floor, since it is a lot closer to your feet here. I don't know, it was just so appealing to have the board connected to a Wii Remote. That's why the idea stuck around for so long. They didn't need to add LEDs to the board or include any wireless functionality, since the Wii Remote would handle all of that. Plus, the Wii Remote has a speaker in it, which they wanted to use, so that way the balance board could talk to the player while using it. Of course, the final version of the board doesn't have a speaker in it, so they only could allow it to talk through the TV. But imagine if it could talk to you at your feet. What a shame. So yeah, you can see why they wanted this connection to the Wii Remote. But of course, they did know that this could be a safety hazard, so they tried to find alternative ways to make the connection work, like making an extra long cable, so that way you could hold the Wii Remote while playing. But that would also be kind of weird, and possibly a tripping hazard. But while they were still trying to figure that out, Miyamoto decided to step on into the office and try out their latest prototype. After trying a few push-ups, he stood up and said that it sucked. The shape was still too square and extremely limiting. Crap, it's time for a redesign, isn't it?
But how wide should it be? Even a little bit could raise the cost by who knows how much. Well, while they were all there in the office watching some exercise DVDs, Miyamoto heard something in them that changed everything. The trainer on the TV said to stand shoulder width apart. "That's it," he shouted. "We need to make it shoulder width. So go out there and measure everybody's shoulders." Nagadera was not the happiest about this change, but it is what it is. So the development team went out to start measuring everybody's shoulders at Nintendo HQ. So that way they had some kind of average width to base the board size on. Reggie also just so happened to be in the building at the time, so they made sure to measure his shoulders as well to get some non-Japanese measurements. They settled on using 42 centimeters as the ideal width and created this prototype, which is looking incredibly similar to the final game, minus the Wii Remote cable. Okay, crisis averted. Oh, who's that at the office door? Oh, it's Iwata. How are you doing? He took one look at the prototype that they made and said something that shook everybody there to their core. No way. There is no way that we're requiring a player to bend down to plug and unplug a Wii Remote from this thing. They had to make it completely separate from the Wii Remote, and that was an order directly from the president. Now, I want you to get a good idea of how difficult this time was for the team. We are late in development of Wii Fit at this point, and the internals of the game's required balance board controller now had to be completely overhauled to add in the wireless functionality from the Wii Remote. This was not an easy task. Turns out, the Wii Remote's wireless functionality was integrated directly into the controller's motherboard. In other words, it was never designed to be an independent module that you could just drop into anything your heart desired. No, the team had to rebuild that wireless functionality from the ground up to add it into the balance board. But Iwata knew that the team could do it. He had a lot of faith in them. They had already tackled so many issues at this point, having to make many iterations on this new bathroom scale controller. And finally, after all that work, they were able to settle on a final design that everyone was happy with.
And that is how the balance board came to be. But what about the game itself? How did we get from Health Pack to Wii Fit? How do we go from a game about weighing yourself in front of your entire family to the best-selling Wii game of 2008? Well, as we talked about earlier in this video, it was an absolute pain. But now that they had this new focus on balance, plus the ability to detect left, right, forward, and back movement, the team was finally excited to get to work on making some balance games.
Now, of course, the final game doesn't just have balance games. You actually have 4 categories to choose from: aerobics, strength training, yoga, and balance games. Originally, though, there were no categories or even any exercises at all. Back then, it was just balance games, and at the beginning, the only games that they had were ones based on sports. That might be why soccer heading only supports left and right movement. It may have been one of the first balance games that was made before they decided to add in forward and back detection. There was also another balance game made early in development that didn't make it into the final game. It was called Trampoline, and it required the player to bend their knees and straighten them out to jump on a trampoline. Matsunaga was the one in charge of this prototype, but he just could not get the Mii to move through the air in a natural way, and there just wasn't enough interest by the team to figure it out. But it was eventually fleshed out and added to Wii Fit U years later, complete with forward and backwards movement too. You know, even though the development team didn't particularly care to add in that forwards and backwards movement to the original Wii Fit, it was greatly appreciated in the end, because it opened up the door to add in a brand new feature to the game: actual exercises. At first, they were planning to just include videos of real trainers doing exercises for you to follow along with. But then, what's the difference between this game and just getting a DVD? We've got this balance board here with the ability to track a wide range of motions. I wonder if we could detect how well the player's doing an actual exercise. So they started experimenting with detecting radio calisthenics. Are we able to accurately tell if someone is doing one of these exercises well? And yeah, it turns out they actually could. That was their advantage. There were plenty of exercise DVDs on the market, but with the balance board, they had an amazing selling point: a game that could give you actual feedback on the exercises you're doing in real time. But who would be giving you that feedback? It couldn't be a Mii because they don't have accurate human proportions in order to show off how to perform an exercise. They were going to need to make a realistic model instead, so they went ahead and made the female Wii Fit Trainer. But at first, it was a little bit too realistic. In fact, a version of this model is still in the final game, just unused. And here it is. But it's not just the model, there's also some unused animations too, like a few that show off radio calisthenics. Not only were these animations used for testing the trainer model in-game, but like I said earlier, radio calisthenics were used to test the balance board's ability to detect exercises. That means these are very early animations. Now, with all that being said, there's no way that they could actually use this model. It just stands out way too much compared to the cartoony art style of the rest of the balance games. So just on a whim, they removed the skin color and found it worked much better. It was a good balance between realistic and cartoony at the same time. Now at the time, that was it. There was no male Wii Fit Trainer. That is until Miyamoto suggested adding him in. But it wasn't this buff man originally. Now Miyamoto wanted the team to add in a chubby, middle-aged man instead. And the team was completely against it. Not because of the character, but because it would take so much work. It was already a ton of work making the first trainer, because their motion capture equipment just could not capture the subtle movements that they needed, like breathing. So they had to manually create those animations. Now you're telling me we're gonna have to do that all over again? A bit later, people started coming in to piggyback on Miyamoto's idea, suggesting they add in a bunch of new trainers, maybe making an entire roster of different ones. No, that's fine. We're okay with just doing 2. And thusly, our 2 iconic trainers came to be.
But that begs the question, who would be in charge of explaining the body test to the player? That is a big honor. Weighing yourself in a body test every day is the core of Wii Fit. It's Miyamoto's pride and joy. So, who would get the honor of explaining just how incredible this test is to the player?
Well, at first they were just going to do another realistic person, but Miyamoto suggested having the balance board as the teacher instead. An interesting idea, but if you think about it, watching a bathroom scale talk about proper posture doesn't sound very interesting. So the team took it another step further and decided to make it a magic bathroom scale that gains the ability to freely change its shape. It could even fly through the air behind the calendar in the main menu, and everyone on the team loved this idea. That is until Miyamoto sent them an email that said there was no way a balance board could actually fly. It would be too heavy. He just felt like it was too weirdly magical for a down-to-earth game like this, so the team put some limits on the kind of things that the balance board could actually do in the game. But even if it couldn't fly, the team was okay because it still had its tail. Yeah, the balance board originally had a tail, because you'll remember back then it was still connected to a Wii remote in order to function. The team used this cord as a tail that the balance board would wag when it's happy, and it was all very cute. But when Iwata walked into the office wanting the cable to be removed, that too was the end of the tail. To make up for this tragic loss, they decided to make the balance board a lot more flexible. That way it could at least show some level of emotion in the game. But still, really would have preferred the tail.
But I am getting a bit ahead of myself. Let's go back to when they just started adding in strength training and the female trainer. During that time, yoga was the hot new thing in Japan, and one of the developers really wanted to see it included in the game. Miyamoto, on the other hand, he wasn't so sure about that. He didn't want them to add it in just because it was cool and popular. It needed to be fun and work well too. Well, luckily, there just so happened to be someone at Nintendo who was working on a prototype for just a random yoga game. So the Wii Fit team asked this person to join in on their project. It just made a lot of sense to add their work to Wii Fit. And honestly, the Wii Fit team needed all the help they could get.
Yoga was an easy add to the game. There were plenty of great poses that they could choose from, but the team struggled to fill out the other 3 categories: strength training, balance games, and aerobics. So Miyamoto suggested they bring in a professional trainer in order to offer recommendations and assess routines that they had already made to verify their effectiveness. This is very similar to how things worked with Brain Age on the DS, where the team would ask Kawashima to verify the effectiveness of their brain training. And you can learn all about that in my video on Brain Age concentration training. I'll put the link up on the top right and on the end card. Sugiyama began doing web searches for balance-based training programs around Japan and came across a trainer named Kaoru Matsui. Looking further into their fitness background, Sugiyama found the gym that he worked for, and on their website, it just so happened to have a photo of 2 scales placed side by side. He was clearly the perfect person for the job. With his help, a bunch of ineffective exercises got scrapped, and the ones he was able to verify were then able to be sorted into the best category for them. For instance, step basics and hula hoop were originally considered balance games, but after learning how effective they were at working up a sweat, it made more sense to put them in aerobics. And thank goodness, because the aerobics category was looking a little sparse. They needed something more, a killer feature that would be the go-to for a good workout. But what would that even look like?
You know how I said earlier in this video that the Wii Fit team just so happened to find someone making a random yoga game? So they grabbed the idea and put it in Wii Fit? Kind of crazy, right? What a coincidence. Well, what if I told you that actually happened twice?
While Miyamoto was contemplating what amazing aerobics exercise they could add to the game, he just so happened to see a prototype that was being made by a different development team, the one behind Wii Sports. Their game was already completed, but they had another idea they were working on for a potential Wii Sports 2, a jogging game. At this time, Wii Sports Resort wasn't remotely a thing on anybody's radar. So when Miyamoto saw this jogging prototype, he asked the director if they would allow him to take this idea and use it for Wii Fit. And they were like, yeah, sure, go ahead. Miyamoto brought it to the Wii Fit team and told them to stick it in aerobics. Now, this is pretty late in development, specifically July 2007, which is about half a year before release. But Miyamoto felt it just fit right in, so he pushed the team to add it to the game. Keep in mind, this was just a prototype jogging demo. It was only using temporary graphics at the time, so yeah, the Wii Fit team had their work cut out for them. Not to mention, isn't it a bit weird to add in a game that doesn't even use the balance board? Miyamoto, you were the one who said that every game should use the balance board. But for this idea, he made an exception. And so the team did what they had to add it in. So where did Free Run come from? Well, that was added in even later in development, in August 2007. It was one of the last things added to Wii Fit before its release a few months later. The reason Free Run was added in was simple. The aerobics category only had 8 games, leaving one spot open in the menu's 3x3 grid. That is literally the reason that it was added to the game. Adding a free run mode that used the same visuals and codebase that they already had, yeah, that was the easiest way to get them to that visually pleasing 9 aerobics games. And with everything brought together, the team was able to step back and take a good look at what they made. It was a video game. A fun video game. Something that the team did not expect to happen. And now that their hard work had finally paid off, they couldn't wait to show it to the public.
So, the first time that people got to learn about Wii Fit was on September 14th, 2006 during Nintendo's Wii Preview event in Japan, though back then, it was still going by the name Health Pack. At the event, Iwata took the stage to explain the concept behind the upcoming Nintendo Wii and show off early versions of the channels. By the way, I made a video all about the development of the Wii menu and Wii channels, so if you've been enjoying this video, you're gonna love my Wii menu video too. I'll put a link in the description, and you can click the card that's showing somewhere on the screen right now. Now, after all was said and done, both Iwata and Miyamoto wrapped things up with a Q&A session. It was during that Q&A that they mentioned Health Pack for the first time. There were no videos or screenshots of the game, it was just briefly mentioned. Miyamoto just brought it up, saying that he hoped Health Pack would be the kind of game that completely changes the gaming market without describing what the game actually was. It was Iwata who gave more details on it, saying that it was about weighing yourself every day, and that he was really looking forward to the game's eventual release since it was so different than anything currently out there. He figured it could make the same big splash that Brain Age did just a year before. So, that was the first time that it was mentioned, but when was the first time that the game was shown for real?
Well, that wasn't until months later, at E3 2007, which was the first time Wii Fit was shown to the public, and yeah, now it was actually called Wii Fit. I have a good feeling that you remember this event, seeing as is where this absolutely famous clip is from.
My body is ready.
Indeed, my body is ready too. ready to look at this on-stage demonstration of Wii Fit to compare it to the final game. And it all starts with the single leg extension strength training exercise. Unfortunately, there was a bit of an issue with the demo. See, the person playing the game is doing a great job, but the balance board does not agree. Bill Trinen even mentioned this issue on stage, saying that the calibration must be off.
So it looks like the calibration is slightly off. You should have the red dot here in the yellow area.
Because of this calibration issue, the game would not stop saying your control is outstanding over and over again, every time the red dot entered the yellow area. And speaking of color, not only is the font color different, the entire workout area is too. It's supposed to be green, with blue being saved for yoga training. Now, that might not seem like a big change, but it really is. It's not just these strength training exercises that are blue instead of green, the entire game is blue instead of green. You'll notice this change the most in Wii Fit Plaza, which has other differences too, like tons of missing buttons that were originally placed in a drop-down menu that appeared if you put your cursor close to the top of the screen. Okay, the next exercise we'll look at is torso twists, which at E3 required the player's center of balance to shift to the left and the right while twisting sideways, and back when twisting forwards. The final game works differently. Whether you're twisting sideways or forwards, your goal is to try to keep your balance almost perfectly centered at all times. But what about something other than exercises? Well, let's move ahead to basic step then, which instead of using this music track, use the same track from Advanced Step, but slowed down.
でこれ楽しみながらね、ゲーム感覚でやれる。The idea is for this one.
The icons showing you where you place your feet are also different, but just slightly. Instead of having the foot you're placing on the balance board in a darker red, it originally had both feet the same shade, which makes it a bit more difficult to see where your foot actually needs to go next. Man, this all looks very cool and nice, but come on, you know this isn't what Miyamoto's here for. He's ready to show off the whole reason this game even exists, the body test. Let's have Reggie take the stage so we can see what changes are shown off here. First, you'll see that the clothing options are gray in this early build, with no way to pick the exact weight that you want to remove from your reading. And with that selected, it's time to start measuring. But not before we follow the balance board's instructions to please stand on me in a natural way. Sounds good to me. This build of the game will then tell you to put down the Wii remote to shave a few small ounces off your weight. Next, it's time for us to verify your weight. The dot that shows that's happening here is pink instead of green. And finally, it's time to actually start measuring. Except the balance board doesn't actually say that in the early version. It doesn't say anything. There's not even a rotating science guy either. It's just some small beeping sounds and silence.
This is high pressure.
Alright, measuring is all done, but before we get to the weight, it's time to see your center of balance, which in this early build zooms you in way further. And we also get to see it from a different point of view as well. It shows you the balance from the side in this build, which ended up being completely removed from the final game. And now, the moment Miyamoto's been waiting for, your weight! Comparing the results screens side by side, you can see it looks way different from the final game, showing a lot more data on the screen. But you know what it doesn't show? Your actual weight. It only shows BMI in this build and no option to see more detailed info. And there's an interesting backstory behind this. See, there was a point in development where the team was going to completely hide your weight from being viewed. And it wasn't because they wanted to soften the blow of body test, it was actually because of a very challenging certification process they were going through at the time, trying to get the Wii balance board classified as a real bathroom scale in Japan. Due to this long and very difficult process, they weren't sure that they were going to be allowed to include weight measurements in the final game before the intended release date. But Miyamoto said very strongly that it had to be done with absolutely no compromise allowed. And yeah, they did manage to make it happen in time so it could be included. For Miyamoto, this is great news. But to a lot of people, it didn't really matter. Not a lot of people wanted to have their weight shown on screen in front of everybody, so they kind of hid it away behind a button. They were trying to be at least a bit sensitive, which is probably why they scrapped some of these over-the-top animations for the result screen. These are all unused in the final game, and they all predate E3 2007. The one for the normal ranking is fine, maybe a bit long, but nothing crazy, not like the underweight ones, which go on way longer than the one in the final game. And then there's the overweight ones, and geez Louise, yeah, they toned this down quite a bit before they showed off the game at E3.
Speaking of which, we still have more to see at E3 2007, because not only did we get a nice on-stage demonstration, but we've also got a nice trailer and a demo on the show floor too. Both of these show us many different parts of Wii Fit that we haven't checked out yet. So what are we waiting for? Let's go check it out.
So first thing I want to bring up is a common change throughout the E3 footage. Everything here in the final game says Wii Fit, but it was originally just the Wii logo. The basic balance test is another place you should have seen this logo, but don't in this early build. You should have also seen a helpful graphic telling you how to play the game, but that's not here either. You also get some interesting text changes, like being told to balance in the blue zone, and the fact that we're on the third challenge instead of round 3. All subtle stuff, I know. Hula Hoops also has some subtle changes too, like the lack of stripes on the hoops, and no pink lights on the background set. Table tilt looks pretty much identical, but the timer here, yeah, that looks very different compared to the final game. This early timer can only be seen in the E3 trailer of the game though, with the show floor build using the final timer instead. But don't be fooled, this game is still different. You'll notice at the very end, instead of showing all the Miis cheering you on, it just has some text appear on screen that says, Total Domination. We should check out Hula Hoops on the show floor too, it's kinda got the same thing. Those missing stripes from the trailer are now here, so it appears that the trailer was using an earlier build than what was playable at E3. But even if we don't get those early hoops in this version, we do get to hear a very different music track compared to the final game. Oh, and you know what? I completely forgot to mention that this isn't even called Hula Hoops in this version. According to this early selection screen, it's actually called Hoop Twirl, and it even sports a different icon as well. So yeah, not only is this early selection screen looking quite a bit different from the final version, it also has some early names and icons for the exercises and games too. We've got soccer heading, which has a different icon showcasing the cleats. Table tilt is here too with a different icon, except originally it was called ball rolling, fantastic name. And then there's ski jump, which at E3 was called ski jumping, and it's got some more changes in it too, like how the speedometer is placed on the left side of the screen instead of the right, and the blue dot meant to show you where you place your balance, yeah, that's not here. So you kind of just have to guess. We do have an example graphic on screen to guide you, and if you look closely, the pose is a bit different from the final game, having you lean more forward. Once you get to the jump, it's also a bit different, with your goal being to stand completely straight, but the final game wants you to lean slightly forward instead. But that's enough balance games, I want to see some yoga! We haven't seen any of those poses yet. So let's select one from the menu, and you can tell they're yoga because they all have pose added to the end of their names. That was removed from the final game. Once we pick one, you'll notice that the trainers don't have any voices yet, but I'm assuming it was meant to be added in later. But that's not to say that this build of the game is only missing things. There's actually a cool feature here that was completely removed from the final game: camera control. Look at all these camera options you had in the E3 demo. The final game lets you switch only between a predetermined front and back camera angle, with all these controls being completely removed. My theory is that they had to be removed when the team added in the deep breathing segments, where the camera starts moving around on its own, like in the warrior pose. Stuff like that didn't happen in the E3 version because guided breathing wasn't shown with that giant blue circle. Instead, it was an icon on the top left of the screen that swapped between inhale and exhale throughout the exercise. Icons very similar to these are actually still in the final game, just unused. In fact, we have even more guided breathing graphics that are unused, like these two from the Wii Fit icon_test file. And with that, we can breathe a sigh of relief, because that was all there was to look at E3 2007.
A few months later, we got to see Wii Fit again on October 10th, 2007, where it was shown off at the Nintendo conference. At this point, it looks pretty much exactly the same as the final game, except that it's still blue. And we're only a couple months away from the launch of the game. What made them change the game's color at the very last possible moment?
Well, the whole reason it was blue to begin with was to match the Wii aesthetic. Yoshiyuki Oyama was the design director of Wii Fit and the person who chose that blue color. But after E3 2007, he was starting to get a bit worried. He was afraid that the game would lack the visual difference it needed to truly stand out. It was actually the day before the Nintendo conference that he began talking about switching the color to green, because you'll notice that the Nintendo conference's key color was green. The team really liked this specific shade of green chosen for the conference. It had kind of a healthy look to it. So they took the color and quickly changed the game's aesthetic right before release. In fact, according to the unused timestamp.txt file in Wii Fit, the build date for the Japanese version of the game was October 29, 2007 at 2:22 a.m., which means that this game's change from blue to green was done within the last 20 days of Wii Fit's development. But they did manage to get it done in time for the game's release on December 1st, 2007 in Japan. And this little project that felt like it was going absolutely nowhere was now selling over 250,000 copies in its first week on the market. It was an absolute success.
Now, we have been talking about unused stuff in Wii Fit here and there over the course of the video, but I saved the most interesting stuff to talk about here. It's not a lot, but what we do have shows off some incredibly early stuff and even completely scrapped balance games too.
We'll start things off with an unused image for a scrapped balance test game that would have required you to move through a tight maze. The kanji on this image says temporary, so technically we don't know if this test ever actually existed in playable form. But if it did, it probably would be a very frustrating game with all those walls so close together. For the games that do exist in the final game, there are some interesting scrap models for them. For instance, with Table Tilt, we've got a couple unused tables that look to have been scrapped early on. They're just not nearly as polished looking as the final tables, which leads me to believe they got cut before they went through and made them all look pretty. For soccer heading, we've got the opposite situation going on. This early ball is looking very polished. It is completely smooth without a single edge to be found. But don't you worry, there's plenty of edge coming up. Check out this unused panda head with extremely sharp teeth. Or what about this giant spike ball? Yeah, the cleats were originally a giant spike ball. Imagine getting hit in the face with that. Let me tell you, you're gonna lose a lot more than just 3 points if you hit this. In Balance Bubble, we've got a pretty massive unused model. It's an early version of the entire course, and it looks very different from the final version. It actually resembles the E3 2006 obstacle course demo more than Wii Fit, with an art style that looks like a handmade diorama. And that brings us to our final few files in Wii Fit to look at. We've got 3 completely scrapped games that still have unused models lying around inside the game. First is a balance test that would have used these 4 models: a ball, seesaw, stop sign, and a goal. Seems like it would have guided a ball through a course by controlling seesaws to get the ball into the goal. And then there's a stop sign for some reason. Next was a planned fencing game that didn't make the cut. That's where this unused weapon would have been wielded by the player. And it also comes with this tennis ball model, which was borrowed from Wii Sports Boxing. How this game worked is completely unknown. Maybe you're supposed to use the Wii remote to stab the balls being thrown at you while dodging something with the balance board. I have no idea. Feel free to leave your comments on what you think it could be about. But we do have a better idea of how this last scrap balance game would have worked. It's called Parachute, and it's pretty simple. You would have worn this parachute here and aimed for this target. But where exactly would you be landing? Why, on the Wii Sports golf course, of course. All you've got to do is land on this little patch of grass and watch out for the water. Plus, there's also this unused gate ring that may have been associated with Parachute too. Maybe your goal would have been to drop through rings on the way down to the target, something like that. The Parachute game kind of reminds me of Bird's Eye Bullseye from Wii Fit Plus in some ways, just without the rings. You know the game, the one where you play as a chicken. But that's something we can talk about at a later time.
And that is the development of Wii Fit. I can't stress it enough. I love this series. I still play it to this day. It's the only reason I got my Wii U hooked up to a TV. Wii Fit did exactly what Miyamoto and Iwata were hoping for at the Wii preview. Back then, they wanted to prove that a game about weighing yourself every day could become a phenomenon. And it really did. It is the 6th best-selling Wii game of all time, selling over 20 million copies. At the beginning, the team thought that Health Pack would never make it to release, but now they're able to hold their heads up high. They truly changed the game.